My family made a scene because I gave my old car to my divorced sister to support her. She threw down the car keys and said, "You have to give me your new car. So if they don't like my gift, they'll be left without anything." My family exploded when I gave my old car to my divorced sister to help her out. She slammed the keys down and shouted, "If you don't like my gift, you can keep your new car." My name is Chloe. Until last year, I believed my family was normal. I'm 32 and work as a sales manager at North Star Construction. I've always been the responsible one, the rule follower, the one who got good grades and landed a steady job. My older sister Melissa, 36, is completely different. She married her high school sweetheart, Brad, right after college and became a full-time mom to their two boys, Tyler, 12, and Noah, 10. I still remember the day Melissa called me, crying uncontrollably because Brad had packed his bags and left her for his coworker Jennifer. 15 years of marriage ended in an instant. "Chloe," she sobbed over the phone, "how could he do this to me and the boys?" That night, I rushed to her house and found her on the kitchen floor surrounded by tissues, while the boys, confused and upset, locked themselves in their rooms. "What am I going to do?" Melissa asked, her eyes red and puffy. "I haven't worked since before Tyler was born. Brad always paid the bills. I promised to help, though I wasn't sure how." It soon turned out Brad wasn't interested in sorting things out. He refused to pay child support until Melissa took him to court, and even then the amount barely covered groceries. Their beautiful suburban house went to Brad, as it was his before the marriage. "I can help you find an apartment," I offered one afternoon while helping her pack. The boys stayed with our parents, which was a relief because Melissa broke down every few minutes. "How am I supposed to pay rent with no income?" she lamented. That's when I made an offer that would change everything. "I can cover rent until you get back on your feet." Our parents, Dad, a retired accountant, and Mom, a former elementary teacher, immediately offered to help by picking up the boys from school, helping with homework, and ensuring dinner was ready when Melissa started working part-time at a local boutique. For the first few months, everything seemed manageable. I sent Melissa money for rent and occasionally chipped in for extra expenses. I lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, drove a reliable Honda Accord, and made good money at North Star. I thought I could support my sister through her rough patch. But as weeks turned into months, things changed. Instead of moving toward independence, Melissa seemed to sink deeper into a victim mentality. "Brad ruined my life," became her daily refrain. I had planned to be a stay-at-home mom until the boys went to college, and now she was blaming everything on him. I tried to be understanding. I even offered to pay for a therapist, but the look in her eyes told me I didn't need advice on how to feel. I needed money to live. It was humiliating to work at that store. The manager is 10 years younger than me, and if I mentioned I was busy, she'd call our parents, who'd listen and fan her anger for hours. Later, Mom would call saying, "Your sister is really struggling, honey. She needs us now." By the 6-month mark, the financial strain became obvious. It wasn't just rent anymore. There were new soccer cleats for the boys, a malfunctioning refrigerator, and Tyler's math grades were slipping, so he needed a tutor. Every request on its own seemed reasonable. How could I say no when my nephews needed school supplies or winter coats? One night, I sat at my kitchen table with a spreadsheet open on my laptop and nearly choked on my wine. I was spending almost a third of my monthly income on Melissa and her kids. The next Sunday dinner at our parents' house, I decided to address it. With everyone present, Mom, Dad, Melissa, the boys, and me, I said carefully, "I've been thinking. It's been almost a year since the divorce. I'm happy to help with rent, but the extra expenses are adding up. Maybe it's time you look for a full-time job." The room fell silent. Melissa's voice came out low and dangerous. "Are you saying you're tired of helping me?" she snapped. "Do you have any idea what I'm going through? The boys are in school all day." I pointed out, gesturing toward my nephews and reminding them that Mom and Dad help with pickups. "There are jobs with regular hours," I said. "I can't believe you." Melissa suddenly stood up so quickly her chair tipped over. "I'm still reeling from Brad destroying our family, and now you're attacking me too." She grabbed her purse and motioned for Tyler and Noah to follow. They got up reluctantly, muttering goodbye to our parents as the front door slammed hard enough to make the family photos rattle. I looked to Mom and Dad, hoping they'd back me up, but Dad frowned deeply and Mom shook her head. "How can you be so selfish, Chloe?" Mom said. "Melissa is a single mom of 2, and you're single with no kids. You don't need as much money as she does." I was stunned. So, according to them, I should bankroll her forever. "That's what being a good sister means," Mom declared. "It means not being greedy when your family needs you." I realized arguing was pointless. These were the people who had taught me that family comes first, but it seemed that only applied when I was the giver. "I should go," I muttered, standing up. "Thanks for dinner." Driving home that night, I felt completely alone for the first time in my life. A week after that disastrous dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from Melissa. "Need $500 for the boys' clothes. They've outgrown everything and look awful. Please send today." There was no acknowledgement of our argument, not even a please. My finger hovered over the keyboard as I read it. Part of me wanted to set a firm boundary, but then I thought of Tyler and Noah. It wasn't their fault that their mom was acting this way. With a heavy sigh, I transferred the money. Her only reply was a thumbs-up emoji. Work became my refuge at North Star Construction. I was respected and my ideas mattered. When I closed deals, people congratulated me instead of asking for more. I threw myself into a challenging project, securing a contract for a new office complex downtown from a notoriously difficult client. "You knocked it out of the park, Chloe," my boss said after we signed the contract. "This commission is going to be substantial." When the bonus hit my account, I felt a rush of excitement I hadn't experienced in months. For once, I decided to do something for myself instead of stashing it away for Melissa's next emergency. I'd been driving my Honda Accord for 7 years. It was reliable, but I'd always dreamed of something nicer. The following Saturday, I visited 3 dealerships and test drove half a dozen cars. By the end of the day, I proudly drove home in a silver Audi A4. Not the flashiest car on the lot, but definitely a step up from my old Honda. As I drove it home, I felt proud of my hard work and dedication. Then I thought of Melissa. Her car was a 15-year-old Toyota with over 200,000 miles that she constantly complained about, strange noises, barely working air conditioning, and the boys were so embarrassed by it. My Honda would be a massive upgrade for her. At the next family dinner at our parents' house, I deliberately drove the Honda, planning to surprise Melissa. Before I even opened the door, I heard her voice, and then Jenny had the nerve to ask me to cover her shift on Saturday. "I have children, you know. I can't just drop everything because you want to go to a concert," I snapped. "Other single moms at work manage just fine," she retorted. My parents nodded sympathetically as I walked in. Mom patted Melissa's hand. "Some people just don't understand how hard you have it, dear." I bit my tongue and greeted everyone. During dinner, Melissa dominated the conversation with complaints about her job, her coworkers, and of course Brad. I waited patiently for a lull in the conversation. Finally, as Mom served dessert, I saw my chance. I pulled the Honda keys from my pocket and slid them across the table. "I have something for you," I said excitedly. "I bought a new car yesterday and I want you to have my Honda. It's in great shape, has low mileage, and would be perfect for taking the boys to school and activities." Instead of the smile I expected, Melissa's eyes narrowed. She picked up the keys as if they were contaminated. "What did you get?" "An Audi," I asked, my excitement deflating. "Nothing fancy, just an A4. The silence that followed was excruciating. My parents exchanged looks with Melissa. In a few quiet words, Melissa repeated, "Audi." Then she dropped the keys onto the table with a clatter. "While I can barely afford groceries, you're out buying luxury cars." "It's not a luxury car," I defended. "And I'm giving you my Honda. It's worth at least $10,000. Melissa abruptly stood up, kicking the keys across the floor. "I don't want your hand-me-downs. If you really cared about me and the boys, you'd have given us the new car." I was stunned. "You expect me to give you a brand new Audi? Why not? What do you need it for? To impress clients, to feel important? I'm struggling just to keep my kids clothed and fed." I looked at my parents, silently pleading for them to call her out, but Dad cleared his throat and said, "Chloe, maybe you should have consulted us before making such a large purchase." "Consulted you?" I repeated in disbelief. Mom nodded. "If you have enough money for a new Audi, perhaps that money could have been better spent helping your sister get back on her feet. But since you already bought a new car, give it to Melissa." Something inside me snapped. I slammed my hand on the table, making everyone jump as the dessert plates clattered. The room rattled as Tyler's glass of milk spilled. "It's my money," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "I worked hard for it, and I'm not obligated to support you forever, Melissa. I helped you because I love you, but this is absurd. If my Honda isn't good enough for you, then you get nothing." I stood up, walked over to where the keys lay, and picked them up. "Chloe, don't be dramatic," Mom began, but I cut her off. "No, I'm done. I'm not paying for your apartment anymore, and I'm not sending money for clothes, tutoring, or whatever else you claim you need. Figure it out yourself." That night, as I drove home in my reliable, paid-for Honda, which apparently wasn't good enough for my sister, my phone exploded with texts and calls. I ignored them all. I listed my old Honda for sale online, and 3 days later I accepted an offer a bit lower than expected, but I didn't care. I just wanted it gone. Handing over the keys to the new owner, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I had driven that car for years without trouble, yet in the end it brought nothing but grief. A week passed, then another. I drove my new Audi to work, going about my business while trying to silence the nagging guilt planted by my family's words. Maybe I was selfish, maybe I should have given Melissa the new car. Maybe I wasn't doing enough, but I shook my head. I had already done more than enough. Then came the message I'd been dreading. "Rent is due tomorrow. Please transfer the money." No greeting, no mention of our fight, just a demand. For the first time, I replied with a simple no. The response was immediate. My phone rang, I declined the call. It rang again, I declined once more. Then came a barrage of texts. "What do you mean, no? Are you seriously going to make me and the boys homeless? I can't believe you're doing this to us. Mom and Dad are furious with you. I turned my phone off and went to bed early. The next morning, I woke up to 27 missed calls and over 50 texts from Melissa and my parents. I deleted them all without reading and got ready for work. This was the first time in my adult life I'd stood up to my family, and despite the anxiety churning in my stomach, it felt strangely freeing. That evening, around 7 p.m., I heard pounding on my apartment door. I knew exactly who it was. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable, better to get it over with. I opened the door to find Melissa, Mom and Dad standing there, their faces filled with righteous indignation. They stepped in, none of them taking the offer to sit down. Mom spoke first. "Chloe, this has gone far enough. Your sister needs to pay her rent tomorrow or she'll be evicted. That's not my problem anymore." I crossed my arms and replied, "Not your problem." Melissa's voice shot up to a shrill pitch. "You promised to help me. You said you'd pay my rent. I've been paying your rent for nearly a year," she shouted. "I've covered clothes for the boys, tutoring, appliances, everything you've asked for. I've spent thousands to help you, so what? You have the money." Then she yelled, "You bought a brand new car just last week with the money I earned. And when I tried to give you my perfectly good Honda, you threw it in my face. You literally tossed the keys on the floor while flaunting your new car while I'm struggling." I took a deep breath. "Melissa, you're not struggling because of me. You're struggling because you refuse to get a full-time job, because you waste all your energy complaining about Brad instead of moving forward, and because you expect everyone else to fix your problems." "We're family," Mom interjected as if that explained everything. "Family helps each other. I've helped you for a year, but it's never enough, is it?" Melissa snapped. "No matter how much I give, you all act like I'm a selfish monster for having anything for myself because you're single with no kids." She then demanded, "What do you even need money for?" I stared at her in disbelief. "To live my life, to save for my future, to enjoy the fruits of my labor. Why is that so hard to understand?" "Because you're being selfish," Melissa almost screamed. "Now I need that money more than you do, then earn it," I said quietly. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Mom broke the silence. "If you don't help your sister, Chloe, you're not the daughter we raised. We raised you to care about family." I shot back. "No, you raised me to be Melissa's ATM, and I'm done with it." "Fine," Melissa spat. "Keep your precious money, but don't expect to be part of this family anymore. If being part of this family means being exploited and taken for granted, maybe that's for the best." I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. "You'll regret this, Melissa," she hissed as they moved toward the door. "When you're old and alone with nothing but your money, you'll regret choosing it over your family." "I'm not choosing money over family," I said firmly. "I'm choosing self-respect." The door slammed behind them and I collapsed onto my couch, exhausted but feeling oddly peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The guilt was still there, but it was now overshadowed by the relief of finally setting clear boundaries. Over the next few weeks, I learned through mutual friends and relatives that Melissa had been forced to move out of her apartment. She and the boys were now living with our parents, the arrangement that probably should have happened from the start. She was still working part-time at the boutique, and our parents were supporting her, just as they'd expected me to do. According to my cousin Rachel, everyone was now saying I was a terrible person, claiming I abandoned my sister in her time of need, cared more about fancy cars than family, and had always been selfish. A month after our confrontation, Rachel invited me for coffee. "I wanted to check on you," she said. "Your parents are saying some pretty harsh things, and I wanted to hear your side." I told her everything. The year I spent paying Melissa's rent, the constant extra demands, the car incident, all of it. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I've always thought Aunt Karen and Uncle Jim spoiled Melissa too much. But for what it's worth, I believe you did the right thing. You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." That phrase stuck with me. It perfectly summed up what I'd been doing. Burning through my resources, my boundaries, and my self-respect just to keep Melissa comfortable in her victimhood. "Thanks, Rachel," I said. "That means a lot." Driving home in my Audi, finally enjoying it without guilt, I realized something important. I wasn't alone after all. Even if my parents and sister turned their backs on me, I still had people in my corner. More importantly, I had finally chosen to stand in my own. 6 months passed. Summer faded into fall and fall gave way to winter. With the holidays looming, I began to wonder about family gatherings. Would I be invited? Would I even want to go? I hadn't spoken to my parents or Melissa since that night in my apartment, even though I'd tried. About 2 months after our confrontation, the messages started to change in tone. They weren't filled with angry demands anymore but were more conciliatory. Guilt trailed behind when the boys missed their aunt. One day Mom texted, and at breakfast, Tyler asked hesitantly, "Where are you, Aunt Chloe?" Melissa had texted earlier too, but I didn't reply. I knew exactly what they were doing. Using the kids to guilt me. It pained me to think about what my nephews might have been told about why Aunt Chloe had vanished, but I couldn't cave. Any sign of weakness or willingness to reconnect would drag me back to square one. Work remained my sanctuary. I dove into projects, secured new clients, and earned another promotion. With a healthier bank account, now that I wasn't supporting 2 households, I started prioritizing my own well-being. I joined a yoga class, reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during the Melissa crisis, and even went on a few dates, though nothing serious came of them. For the first time in years, I was putting myself first without guilt. In early December, I bumped into my nephew Tyler at the mall. He was with a friend, and there was no sign of Melissa or anyone else. When he saw me, his eyes widened, and he hesitated before approaching. "Aunt Chloe?" he asked cautiously, as if unsure I'd even recognize him. I greeted him with a warm smile. "Tyler, how are you, buddy?" he replied, shuffling his feet. "We're staying with Grandma and Grandpa now. Mom complains a lot, and Noah and I share a guest room." I nodded, careful not to speak ill of his mom. "How's school?" I asked. "Good, I made the basketball team," he said, a small smile crossing his face. "Coach says I might even start next game." "That's fantastic. I'd love to come watch sometime if that's cool with you," I offered. His face lit up. "Really? Our next game is Thursday at 4:30. I made a mental note and promised to be there. After the game, I waited outside, uncertain whether to approach him. Tyler took the initiative, jogging over with his gym bag. "You came," he said, genuinely surprised. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, gesturing toward the parking lot. "Is your mom here?" he asked, shaking his head. "Grandma brought me, she's waiting in the car." I followed Tyler to a familiar sedan where my mother sat behind the wheel. When she saw me approaching with Tyler, her face was unreadable. "Hi, Mom," I said simply. After a long moment, she finally asked, "Chloe, what are you doing here?" "I ran into Tyler at the mall. He invited you to his game." Her gaze softened slightly. "He's getting really good, isn't he?" she added. "Amazing," I agreed. An awkward silence fell as Tyler looked between us, hoping for some sort of reconciliation. Finally, I asked, "Would you like to get coffee sometime? Just the 2 of us." She hesitated, then nodded. We agreed to meet the following week, and as they drove away, a glimmer of hope stirred inside me. Maybe not all bridges were permanently burned. Coffee with Mom was tense at first. We toasted around vague topics: the weather, her garden, my work. Finally, I took a deep breath and addressed the elephant in the room. "I miss you and Dad," I said softly. "And I miss the boys, but I can't go back to how things were." Mom stared into her coffee cup. "Melissa is still struggling, I know, and I'm sorry about that, but I can't be her safety net anymore." "You abandoned her," she accused, and I shook my head. "I helped her for nearly a year, paying her rent, buying clothes for the boys, covering tutoring. I did everything I could, but nothing improved. Instead, she only grew more dependent." Mom fell silent for a moment before admitting, "Your father and I might have enabled that. We always babysat her. She was the fragile one and you the strong one." It was the first time I'd heard my parents acknowledge that Melissa was treated differently. Being the strong one didn't mean I had to carry everyone else. "No," I replied firmly. "I was raised to be more than Melissa's ATM." Mom agreed slowly. "Perhaps we expected too much from you." It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. We even planned a dinner for just the 4 of us, me, Mom, Dad, and Melissa, to try to clear the air. I was nervous but hopeful. That dinner never happened. The night before our scheduled meeting, Melissa told Mom she'd leave the house for dinner if I was present, still furious over what she saw as my abandonment. So I ended up having dinner with just my parents. It was stilted and uncomfortable, yet we managed to reach a fragile understanding. They agreed to stop pressuring me to support Melissa financially, and I promised to be more involved at family gatherings when possible. "She'll come around eventually," Dad said as I was leaving. "She just needs more time." Maybe she will, maybe she won't. I realized then that I was okay either way. The weight of guilt I'd carried for months began to lift. I'd done nothing wrong by setting boundaries and refusing to be exploited. Driving home that night, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. I'd lost the unconditional support of my family, but I'd gained something far more valuable: self-respect. I'd learned that helping others shouldn't come at the cost of my own well-being, that love shouldn't be measured by financial support, and that it's possible to care deeply for someone while still saying no to their endless demands.